Let's talk oxygen tanks. We'll just talk about these little ones. This one's a B, as in baby, if that helps you remember. These tanks are filled at 2,000 PSI. They call them sleeping giants because they just, if this were to get knocked off, this thing takes off at 100 miles an hour in less than a second. And it'll go through people, it'll go through a wall, it'll hit a car and knock it over. This little one. Now these little ones won't go very far, but they'll go quick and they'll do a lot of damage. The bigger ones go further. So the bigger they are, the harder they fall is very true. So do not drop these, don't bang them. They are pretty resilient and durable, but I wouldn't push your luck. They have a little dust cap on the top of them. This is to keep any particular matter from getting into the valve. Because if dirt or dust gets in there and then you turn the valve on, that accelerates that particle really fast and can create heat, which could cause a fire. So we want to keep these clean. That's why they have these dust covers on them. If these get busted off, we take a blue piece of paper, a painter's tape, and put over that and mark it as still full, but we still keep that covered. We have to keep that dust out of that cover there. These tanks, because oxygen is, medical oxygen is considered a drug, every drug has to be tracked by a lot. And so when they fill these tanks, there's a lot number on every tank. And this one is CA06A105EA. Now that means something to someone somewhere. What this does is it tells you where it was pumped, who pumped it, and what date, and what batch it got pumped on. So they're pumping all day long. It'll tell you exactly what batch was pumped. Now if there was a problem with the oxygen, say that it had a smell, or someone died while they're on their oxygen and they suspect that this was not really oxygen, it may be helium, they would do a recall, and everyone that was pumped on that day and by that person and that lot would be pulled and brought back in for inspection. So it's a safety thing, and every time you deliver a tank, you have to have that lot number recorded when you deliver. Not on the pickup, but on the delivery, you have to have that recorded. These tanks come in different sizes. So this is a B. And if you know the alphabet, the next one's C, D, and E. We don't carry C's. We can get them from Airgas if need be. This one here is a D. So I'll just put these side by side so you can kind of see them. B, D, and that's an E. So this one here is a M6. It holds 6 cubic feet or cubic liters. This one holds 24. So it's 4 times the size on that. Again, they're all the same pressure though. They're filled to 2,000 PSI, and they're all very, very, very dangerous if they're tipped over and hit. That's why everything has to be secured in a rack of some kind so that they're not going to tip over and cause some problems. So those are the different tanks. How long do these tanks last? You'll get that question a lot. On your oxygen setup, on the first or second page of that, it has a small chart. And you'll read that chart and it'll say if they're on 2 liters, an E will last so long. If they're on 2 liters, a B will last so long. So you just have to get that chart. If you memorize that chart, it's helpful. If you memorize just 2 liters and memorize that, then you can half it for one. You know, if it's 4 liters, you half it. If it's 1 liter, you double it. You can kind of go off that. So just memorize what the 2 liter is. It's what most people are on anyway. And then you can calculate the others in your head if you need to. It's a helpful thing sometimes. But again, the racks, here are some of the racks. The B's have a specific rack, and E has a specific rack. But in a pinch, if all you had was an E rack, you can put B's in one of these. It'll fit. You can't do the reverse. E's just won't fit in that smaller one. But if you had to, you could put B's in this and use it and it would secure them and keep them from tipping over. So they come in all shapes and sizes, but they've got to be in a facility.
We have bags?
Another thing, yes, we do have bags. The other thing with these is if you're putting tanks in a facility, you have to have the tanks in a rack. They have to. If the state comes in and surveys them and they're not in a rack, then they'll get dinged. They'll they'll get a citation, and their survey, one tank could screw up a perfect survey. And that is bad, bad news. And you don't want to be on the other side of that. So always deliver with a rack in a facility. In a home, we prefer to leave a rack because it's safer. They don't have to have one. If they refuse a rack, so be it. But I prefer anybody with multiple tanks to have a rack. It's just a lot safer. These tanks are also, they've got bags that you can put the B tanks in. There's bags for all sizes of the tanks. The E tanks are so big that they get really heavy. Those bags are typically strung on the back of a wheelchair. So there are different sizes of bags. So there's E and D bags here in this, and then you've got some B bags in this as well. Those need to be laundered in between use. So you bring them in, you have a bucket for laundry stuff, we throw those in there. We wash them with Clorox bleach to disinfect them, and they come back, we bag them and tag them, and they're ready to go again. Let's stick with oxygen for right now. Whenever we deliver, we want to leave enough supplies for people that they're not calling us up in 3 or 4 days and saying, hey, I need another connector or something like that. So we want to give them, now we're talking hospice here. We want to give them enough supplies to get them through their whole stay. So typically a hospice patient's going to be on a few days, a few weeks, maybe even a couple of months. So we're going to try to set them up with at least a month, or maybe a little more than a month worth of stuff. And if we have to go back out later, then so be it. But what we'll do is we'll take on this one right now, and this may change over time. We've changed this. This is not set in stone. But for cost effectiveness, we found that if we do 4 nasal cannulas, we do 3 25-foot tubing, 1 humidifier bottle, and if we deliver the humidifier bottle and put it on, then leave another one. So you'd leave 2 if you actually put it on. So at least 1 humidifier bottle is a backup. And then 1 regulator. There's 2 different regulators. We'll talk a little bit more in depth on these. There's a continuous flow. When you turn it on, it's just running all the time. And then there's a conserving, which pulses with each breath. We'll talk a little more about those. Also in this kit, we're putting all this in this little bag. So we're putting this bag. We want to use a couple of these nipple nuts. These are what connect your tubing right straight from your concentrator. We also want to have inside this regulator, when it's cleaned, it's patient ready. It's got a wrench in it. We talked about patient ready already before. So this wrench is in there. We want to leave them with an extra. So they'll have 2. They'll have 1 with the rig, and they'll have 1 as a backup. And then we'll have 3 connectors thrown in to the bag, because if they need to connect their 7-foot tubing with their 25-foot, and then they need to go longer, then they're going to have to hook another 25-foot on there to make 50. So they're going to have to at least have 2 connectors just to get to 50 feet. And then they have a third is their extra, their backup.
How long do you recommend their hose be?
Cannot be any longer than 60 feet. So because that creates back pressure to your machine, and your machine won't deliver accurate oxygen flows. So if they want to go longer than 60 feet on their tubing, they can't. They need to move the concentrator into a place that's more central located in their home maybe. But they're going to have to do something, because it won't push that length any further than that. So that is a kit. Your typical kit is going to be your nasal cannulas, tubing, humidifier bottle, a reg of some kind, your wrenches, your nipple nuts, and your connectors. Right now, if you look at the pink on each one of these, if it's got a pink on it, these are the ones that you pull for a kit. The green here is for high flow patients. If they're getting a 10-liter concentrator, set them up with a high flow system. High flow tubing, the reason why is the nasal cannulas isn't really too big of a problem for the higher flows. It's these little connectors are the choke point. So if you have to use a connector between the cannula and the tubing, then you've just created a bottleneck, and it's choking that flow down, and that higher flow won't go through that connector. So your connectors are your killers on your high flow. So to avoid that, we've brought in stuff called high flow tubing. And this is a beefier tubing, it's beefier connectors and so forth, and it's a straight shot. There's no connectors needed. So it comes in a 7-foot, a 25-foot, and a 50-foot length. So depending on if you need 50 foot, you use a 50-foot cannula. There's no connectors. It's just a straight shot right to the patient. On high flow patients, so for a tubing kit, high flow tubing kit is going to be one of the 7s, 2 of the 25s, it's the most common one that you'll probably use, and then 1 of the 50s. And then it also requires a high flow humidifier bottle. This bottle will allow the higher flows through it. If you use one of these regular humidifier bottles, then the pressure will get so high in this that it'll exceed the capacity, and it has a little alarm built into this, and it'll chirp like a real high, it sounds like a bird. And some people say, my concentrator sounds like a bird's going off. What they've done is they've got a low flow humidifier bottle on a high flow system.
Wow.
And so that chirp noise was designed to do that, so that it'll chirp, it goes off, it goes pew, pew, about every 3 or 4 minutes, because the pressure will build and it'll blow that off and makes that chirp. So it's kind of, if you hear that in the background, a really high pitched noise every couple minutes, then they've got the wrong humidifier bottle on. This one has the same blow-off system in it, but it's rated for much higher. So this it'll accommodate that flow. So you've got to use a different humidifier bottle. So the kit is going to be 1.7, 225, fit 1 of the 50-foot, and then your higher flow humidifier bottle. There's no need for connectors or anything, but you do still need your nipple nuts, and you'll also need your wrenches for the tanks. Okay, so that's indicated by the green. Right now, anything with the green is in your high flow tubing kit. Now those may change a little bit over time. It's not set in stone, like I said. But the other thing with high flow tubing patients is you're going to run into people that need oxygen masks. There's 2 different types of masks. We're going to pop this open so you can see them. This is just a simple O2 mask. Your oxygen tubing goes on the end there, and this will go over their head and their face, just like that. It has got little ports on the side. I don't know if you can see them though, but it's got little tiny ports on the side so that room air can come in. So if they're breathing really fast and heavy, and there's not enough oxygen coming in here to provide the full volume of the breath, room air can travel in from the sides, and then when they breathe out, the CO2 can escape. The other thing to remember on a mask is they have to be at a certain flow. Shad, what was it? What's the minimum they can be on this? Remember? 5. 5 liters. They have to be on 5 liters, because what happens, if it's less than that, the CO2 that they breathe out will get trapped in here and they rebreathe it. So right now, I'm rebreathing my own CO2 if I have this on with no oxygen running. Now, if I have this on 2 liters, it's not enough to push all the CO2 out before I take another breath. And so I'm going to rebreathe my own CO2, and I'm going to get really, really sick. So this has got a mask. If somebody asks you on 2 liters and they want a mask, it's got to be 5 liters or higher. It just has to. Otherwise, they're going to be rebreathing their own CO2 and get really, really bad. There is a more effective mask. It's called a non-rebreather. This is a simple mask. There's just a little cup basically over your face. So the non-rebreather mask is a step up in therapy. It enables, it's called an FiO2, and I don't remember what that stands for, but it's basically the percent of oxygen. When you're breathing on a nasal cannula, if you have just one of these nasal cannulas and you're breathing on that, you're mixing a lot of room air with that device. They're getting a lot of oxygen, but they're also getting a lot of room air. So they're probably getting mixing with the room air, they're probably getting 30%. Room air is 20, so you're getting 30, maybe 35% on that. With a mask, that jumps it up maybe to 40 or so. With this type of mask, though, it's a non-rebreather, so your oxygen goes onto this port, and any extra oxygen that's delivered goes into this bag. So when they're exhaling, there's a little valve in here that shuts everything off, and all the oxygen, or all the exhaled air escapes the mask, but this is filling up with oxygen on the exhale. So they're going to have extra oxygen in here, and when they breathe in, they're going to get the full delivery of the oxygen plus what's in the bag. Now, if this is working properly, when they breathe on it, when they take a breath, the bag should deflate, but not all the way. If that bag deflates all the way, they're exceeding the volume of the system, and they're not getting as much oxygen as they could. Now, does that make sense? So if this bag goes completely flat between every breath, if they were to increase the oxygen flow a little bit, then they'll get a little more oxygen with each breath and increase the efficiency of this mask. If they don't want to raise the flow, that's fine. They don't have to. But if this has got those ports, they can bring room air through this port. So it mixes room air in, so it decreases the amount of oxygen they get per breath as a percent.
Okay.
So if they're using this and the bag's going completely flat, they could bump up the oxygen a little bit and get a little more therapy value out of each breath. So this is a non-rebreather. Okay, this is plastic, gets a hole in it. Now what do? In every one of these, in every bag, there's a little fitting thing. What you would do is you tear this bag off, this tape, this bag's going to come off, and this little fitting is going to fit underneath here. I'm going to take this whole thing out. Maybe. Oh, wait, that should fit right. Oh, wait, no. This is going to fit right up into this piece here. That's not going to do it. I don't know why I can't get that out of there. This whole thing should, you know what?
Yeah, a pair of pliers.
Pair of pliers. You can see why I like a Leatherman. There we go. This piece now, this is the extra piece, so don't have them throw it away. This now goes up into this mask and it becomes a simple mask. But at least they're getting their oxygen. If it has a hole in that bag, they'd be getting very little, if any. So this is kind of a backup type fitting. So don't have them keep that. Don't throw it away. That's a little extra. It's backup. Everything respiratory is always backup. We want to have some way to get them oxygen somehow. The adjustment on these masks, I didn't mention this on the simple, they're both the same. Just a little piece of aluminum across the bridge of the nose. And you just press it over the bridge of the nose to fit tightly over the nose. So that it reduces the amount of leakage on there. Another thing is if they've got goatees or beard, they're going to get some leakage around there. So if they're really concerned, they can shave around the bottom and on the sides and clean that up, and it'll allow that to seal a little better. It's not going to be a huge difference maker, but for some people, they're very sensitive, and that could be enough. So we had simple masks, and then this is the non-rebreather with the bag on it, and with the backup piece on it there. Okay? Let's go through a couple other things. If someone's on a Cpap, this little adapter will enable you to take oxygen tubing. The Cpap is a device that blows air continually into someone's airway to keep them open during the night when they're sleeping. To entrain the oxygen into that, you'll take your oxygen tubing from the machine and bring it into this little piece here. And in this piece, they've got a large bore tubing that will go out to them and to their mask, and this will go onto their machine. So this attaches to their machine, and their tubing will go onto this, and their oxygen will drop right into this and go down along the line and deliver it to them that way. So this is called a Cpap Adapter. Have one of these on your van at all times. This is an extra thing. You don't run into it a lot, but this is just a really easy way to fix that kind of problem. You've got 7-foot tubing. This is just 7 feet of straight tubing rather than the 25. We would use this in a situation where we're taking 2 5-liter concentrators and we can Y them together. There's a black Y piece that we can use, so you take 2 of these from there to a Y piece and then onto the patient. We'll show you how to do that down the road here, but that's together here as well. We've got a bi-flow mask. I don't know if you can see this. This is a nasal cannula. These are expensive, so I'm not going to open this up. But this is like a small little cup that sits on your upper lip, and the oxygen flows into that, and when you breathe, you pull it from that cup, and it goes into your nose from that little cup, so it's open. So somebody's got really sore nose, or they've got issues, they don't like something up their nose or something like that, this is an option for them. But it just sits right there on their lip. It's called a bi-flow mask. And these, a lot of these, you can get these from Medline. They're made by a company called WestMed. Another option for your Y on this is made by Salter. This is a 4 foot of tubing. It's got a Y piece already in it. So this piece, you'd hook these up to the 2 concentrators, and then your 1 piece comes here straight in. This is probably more effective than those black ones, the ones I showed you, Shad. This is a better fit for those because it doesn't restrict the flow. When you hook 2 concentrators together, they're going to fight each other a little bit. This Y is quite a bit bigger, and it reduces some of that interplay, that interference that they cause to each other. So those you don't use very many of those. You'd rather use a 10 foot or a 10-liter concentrator than 2 5s, but sometimes that's all you got. That's all you've got. There are 25-foot regular cannulas. We've gone away from these because they're so expensive, but we do have a handful of them, and they are available. If someone's using their portal system and the tubing's 7 foot of tubing's too long, they do make them in a 4 foot length, so that's a little more convenient. If they're packing those things around, they don't have this tube hanging clear down. It's shorter. They're available. They can get, honestly, from Salter, you can get just about any length of cannula or tubing that you want, but we don't carry them all just for practical purposes and cost. This is a water trap. You'll run into a situation where somebody calls up and they say, you know what, I really, I'm getting water in my nose from my oxygen. And this is used to prevent that. You'll hook your tubing from your machine here, and then the cannula will go on here. So it's like a big spacer. And the water, as it comes in here, drops out, and then the oxygen passes on through with the O2. To drain it, they just pull the top off, dump it, and then put this back on, and they're good to go again. If it gets too full, then the water will be pushed on through into the cannula anyway. So if they're getting a lot of water in their tubing, they need to be dumping this pretty regularly.
If you're getting a lot of water, it's usually because your humidifier bottle is overfilled.
Correct. That's if they are overfilling that humidifier bottle, it overspills into the tubing and then goes in and gets to their nose. The other thing that can cause it is when you have a change in temperature. It causes, these concentrators are running pretty warm, and when the warmer air is, the more water it can hold, and then when it comes out of the machine and it's running along a cold floor, the temperature of that oxygen is going to drop, and any moisture that it can't carry anymore is going to rain out as condensate, and then it builds up in the tubing over time, and then it gets to their nose that way. So if it's in the winter, it's where you're going to see more use of this, like in the fall and winter. It's when you'll see a bigger need for these, usually because of that warm machine and cold air on the floor that it's running on. So this is called a water trap. You can get them from Drive or from Salter, but these work really well. You should always have a couple of these on your van. They also have over-ear protectors. These cannulas, as they're sitting on the ears, can really make someone's ears sore. So they have these little over-ear protector things. They're just a foam, hollowed out foam. So it's just a foam strip with a little hole in it, and it's got a small slit down the middle of it, so you can lay your cannula over the ear part of it goes in that, lays in there, and that closes up around it. And then that allows it, and then that goes up over their ear and cushions over the top of their ear. Because that just, if they've got a pair of glasses and they got the tubing, their ears can get really, really sore. So those are over-ear protectors. You can get those, these, just about anybody makes these as well. We usually get these from Medline or Drive. Your extra tubing and supplies, you always want to make sure you've got extra tubing. We try to keep, like the cannulas over on this side with, your cannulas are here that you're pulling. Try to keep like with like again. Your tubing, your high flow stuff, high flow humidifier bottles. We have all of our extra stuff here. Usually, if we get a lot of our tubing and stuff from Drive now, it's cheaper because we can throw it into a regular rate and we don't pay shipping. But there are a few things we have to get from Salter, and those are the high flow systems. We have to get high flow from Salter. They're the only ones that make it that we're aware of at this point. And the humidifier bottles that are high flow are from Salter as well. So any high flow stuff you get through Salter. The rest of it you can pretty much get from Drive or from Medline. But when you're getting down, you want to make sure you've got sufficient. If you're ordering from Drive, it takes 3 to 5 days to get your tubing. So you need to have a week's worth of oxygen tubing sitting here. If you don't, get some coming. Salter takes longer to get you. You're going to get almost 10 days before you see Salter come in. So you got to have a little bigger cushion on your Salter stuff. However, our high flow stuff, we're not putting a lot of that out, so we're not burning through that as quickly. So it's not as big a concern, but if you're using your last case of stuff, that's when you've got to order another one pretty quick. Now, granted, you will have some on your vans, so you've got a little more than what you're seeing here on the vans as well, but don't rely on that. Rely on what you've got in here in the stock. Okay? Let's move on from the tubing and all these odds and ends. Let's talk about the rack. These are a cart. So the racks are what holds the tanks, the empty and full tanks. We call these the carts. These oxygen carts are designed to be portable and somebody puts their tank in it and they pull their tank along with them. They will, over time, they have these little foot things on, these rubber foot things on here. Sometimes these will go missing. Rather than deliver one with one missing, pull the other one off, and it'll be fine. But these just don't prevent things from having marring the floor a little bit, but they're not essential to have on there. The wheels, when you're cleaning these get really dirty in here, so make sure you spend extra time in cleaning the wheels. And also there's a little set pin here that holds the tank in place and from rattling around. If this is missing, we have a bunch of extras over in the cleaning area where we bag and tag stuff. There's extra pins. Some of these are adjustable. This one's adjustable for height, so the height of push those pins in, and this will go up or down. So if someone's really short, someone's really tall, you can accommodate a little bit of that. Not all of them have that adjustment, but if they do, you can use it, kind of thing. And again, you can see these are bagged and tagged, just like everything else. It has to be tell us who did it and when. So there's your rolling cart. Let's talk about the oxygen machine itself.
Did it make a cart that mounts on a wheelchair?
They do, actually. This little rack will attach, when we do wheelchairs, we'll show you how it actually attaches. But this will go on the back of a wheelchair, and the tank will sit right into this. It's almost identical to this, just the wheelchair is now the wheels to it rather than its own wheels. So this will attach this right to the wheelchair. We'll show you when we get to the wheelchairs how that's done. You'll be doing that on a fairly regular basis. These are nice, so if they're in a wheelchair, they're not doing this and trying to maneuver a wheelchair, and so it's as much for the caregiver it is for the patient, because they just push the wheelchair down the hall and they've got an oxygen tank built in. Whereas this, they're trying to manage two things, and it's really cumbersome for them to do that. So this is an O2 holder, a wheelchair O2 holder on there. We'll show you how those attach, but just know that they're available. Good question, Chad. Let's talk oxygen concentrators. They come in different sizes and shapes. Is this a 10?
I don't believe we have any 10s in the warehouse.
We don't have any 10s in stock right now. So these concentrators, James just barely wrapped this, so I'm not going to unwrap this one. Well, I'm going to have to. Sorry, James.
He's gone. He won't.
He's gone home.
We'll just have to rewrap it.
We'll wrap it again. We'll save that tag and put it back on. They may look different, they may be different shapes and colors, but they all operate in a very similar manner. What these do is they pull room air through a filter. They take that and put it into a thing called a molecular sieve. It's a sieve bed that pulls the nitrogen off and allows the oxygen to pass on through a port on the front, and that goes to the patient. These are regulated by a flow. Oxygen is delivered by liters per minute. That's the measurement that they use. And it's adjusted on here with this little dial. There's a ball that's specially sized and weighted that floats at a certain level when you have this machine running. And so if you want 2 liters of oxygen, you turn this knob until that ball is split by the number 2. And that's how you set your oxygen, and that's how they get their oxygen. On this particular machine, you can use Humidifier Bottle. This is an Invacare machine. A Humidifier Bottle on this machine will actually, you pull this little strap out here like this, and on the back, this one's a little different. You have to pull that out, and there's a little adapter right in the back. So this adapter now goes on this port where the tubing normally goes, and this black fitting goes right on the top of your humidifier bottle.
Is that tubing reusable?
This tubing is. It doesn't come in contact with the patient, and so this is reusable. So when this is done, when you're done with that, you put it back in. When you pick these up, I prefer that you just take these and slip them right back in that hole so they don't get lost. And that is one of the things that when we say patient ready, this is one of the things you're going to be checking when you're cleaning these, is make sure it has one of those. Now these machines, the Respironics and the DeVilbiss, they have just a hard fitting right on the front that you just go right onto there. You don't have this extra tubing that we just had to use on this Invacare machine. So your humidifier bottle goes right on there, or that green nipple nut, the Christmas tree looking thing, goes right onto the front. So this machine, maintenance as far as the patient is concerned, the only thing we need them to do is to pull this out once a week. Take it to the sink and rinse it out with warm soapy water, just and then dry it as best they can. It doesn't have to be completely dry, but it can't be dripping wet either. But they can put it in damp, just put it right back in, and they do that once a week. And that's really all the maintenance that they have to do. The other thing that they should be checking is making sure that this doesn't get bumped and their leader flow gets off. So when they should be checking to make sure that their leader flow is accurate. You know, if nobody's messing with it, it'll stay right on. But if someone were to bump it, or if they have a grandkid that's really curious or something, they may have been messing with that and their leader flow's off. Mm-hmm. And we'll do a segment about getting too much oxygen. You can get way too much oxygen, and we'll talk a little more about that going forward. But if they're supposed to be on 2 liters and they're bumping it to 4 against medical advice, we need to educate them. They need to stay at the level that their nurse or their doctor recommended, because they can get too much oxygen. It can cause them to be sick. And we'll talk more in depth on that. These concentrators are tracked by a rental number, so make sure you're getting that rental number when you're delivering and picking up. Verify that those numbers are on there and correct. And then we'll go through on the cleaning of these machines. There's more testing that needs to be done. We'll go over this again, but just know that you've got to test for flow. You got to test for pressure, what kind of pressure the compressor's putting out. If the pressure's up and down, or too low, then the compressor's dying on you. You got to get it replaced or fixed, rebuilt. The filter here needs to be cleaned or replaced. And this filter, this is the cabinet, or not a cabinet filter, but an internal bacteria filter. This one, this filter is keeps this machine from getting dirt and dust and grime in there. Also keeps the oxygen pure when it gets to the patient. These are typically designed to run for a year at a time. So when you get these, when you put a new one in, you want to put the date that you put it in, and you'll also want to put the hours that the machine is running. The machine hours is recorded on this little, it's like almost like an odometer. And this little, it gives you the number of hours on that machine. So you can tell the date that it was put in, and you can also put the number of hours that was on there. So you just want a magic marker that, just put that on there and let that, before you put it back in. If you don't, the next guy that goes to look at this has no idea how old that thing is. So mark the date that it goes into effect. Okay? Just a side note, later we'll talk a little bit, there's a little port down here in the back on an Invacare machine. This is only on the Invacare machine. This port is used to plug in, and you can use this with what's called a self-fill system. We have only one of those in our stock right now, but we'll show you how that all integrates later on. But this little port is very important to that process there. Okay. Shauna, how are you?
Good.
Should we take a picture of Shauna?
No,
Okay.
not unless you got
Are we good?
auto Photoshop on there that's gonna take 20 pounds off. Are you still recording?
Uh-huh.
Yeah.